Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me today while I talk about a game called Aragami. I've been liking this game to a point, so I thought I'd showcase it for you. It's made by a company called Linceworks. It was released on October the 4th. I am actually currently playing it on PS4, and I'm up to chapter 8 of 13, so take that as you will. This isn't actually like a review or anything like that. I'm sort of like in the middle of playing the game. So Aragami is a stealth game where you play as an undead ninja assassin guy thing. Basically, a girl called Yamiko is trapped in a fortress somewhere in a city, so she performs a ritual to summon you, and you're resurrected as a vengeful spirit. These vengeful spirits are known as Aragamis. Problem is, you don't actually have a memory of who you were before being resurrected, so you have to find that out throughout the game. And because of this, Yamiko decides to call you Aragami since you don't actually know your name and she doesn't know your name either. So the story is actually pretty good as far as I can tell. So far it's had a fair bit of mystery, and that was something that I actually liked, but I feel as though as if you might actually be working for the bad guys, and you can kind of feel that from the beginning, because from the start, Yamiko is, she's sort of acting a little bit suspicious, and it also hints it throughout the game for you as well. I don't know whether that's just me getting that vibe, or whether other people who are playing are getting that vibe. I just found that was something kind of cool about it, just having you thinking that you're on the right side, and then having that hint that you might be working for the bad guys. Dialogue is actually delivered in a few different ways as well. One of the ways for that is that you get a text box that shows up and allows you to press a button to continue reading, which was actually really good. You just press X and you can keep reading at your own pace, basically. There is dialogue during gameplay, and some parts are a bit too fast to read though, so this was a little bit irritating, especially because I actually did want to keep up and follow the story, but I couldn't, because there were situations where I was reading, and then all of a sudden, the subtitles would just disappear. That wasn't really nice. It wasn't pleasant. Now, one thing I did notice as well is that the dialogue can be a little bit stale, and this is mainly due to the lack of animation between the two characters, or the two main characters who are constantly talking. You know, their mouths and faces do change a little, but not enough. I think they could have done a little bit more to emphasize the emotions and stuff like that between the characters. Now, the gameplay in Aragami is actually really good. It's very addictive. Something that I noticed is that I could overlook a lot of the issues it had for the most part. But most importantly, it actually has a very strong emphasis on stealth. From the start, it's actually pretty hard. It's actually very hard to start off with, but as you get the hang of it and unlock more skills, it gets easier and gets a lot better. The stealth mechanics revolve mainly around line of sight as well as hiding in the shadows, and the game actually encourages you to pick your kills, especially with the whole light versus shadows situation going on. Now, there is one thing to note, that there is natural light and man-made light, which affects the mechanics, because your shadow skills don't work in fully lit areas like near a lantern or near a torch or something like that, and that kind of changes the way you play a little bit. There's a few skills that you can actually unlock throughout the game. There's a ranged attack, which allows you to throw a dagger, which is basically a one-hit kill on your enemies. The ability to hide bodies actually has to be unlocked, which was kind of cool. And you can unlock an ability that lets you see through walls, as well as a few others here and there. One thing that actually added to the challenge a little bit was the fact that you needed to unlock skills by finding scrolls in different areas of the game, and this actually encourages a bit of exploration, but that also meant that if you missed out on a scroll, you were losing out on points that you could use to actually increase your character's power. So the main skill that you'll be using a lot throughout this game, and you'll probably be seeing me using it a lot in the background footage, is Shadow Leap, which basically lets you leap a small distance from one shadow to another, or into a shadow if you have the energy to do it. If you're quick enough, you can actually use this to get stealth kills on enemies, which I found was really cool. Like, you can, if he's walking towards you, you can sort of use that Shadow Leap behind him and stab him, or if you need to close the distance or a gap or something like that. It was kind of really cool. One thing that I also found really nice about it is that with Shadow Leap, because you have two options, you can hold R1 and you can aim it and there'll be like this little blue circle thing that comes up, or you can just tap R1. So if you're looking at a shadow and it's within distance, you just tap R1 and you can move to it. It's really good if you're walking around and you're trying to be all fluid and everything. It gives you a bit of room to do that. The game actually does pretty well to prevent you from being too overpowered as well. Enemies will actually one-hit kill you if they see you and they go into an alert and they're like, blah, 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 they get all angry at you or something. So you actually have to be very careful. The window of opportunity to kill them is very, very small. I think you get like maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. And one thing to note, that the hint during the loading screen said that even after an alert has ended, that guards will actually be more on end. I actually thought that was cool, but I actually didn't experience any of this. I don't know whether it was a bug. I'm guessing it is, because after an alert ended for me, the enemies just sort of went back to whatever it was they were doing. They were just minding their own business. One thing that also actually added to the challenge a little bit was the fact that you had a limit of 2 runes for certain skills, and there were other skills that depleted your shadow essence with each use or over time, or being in high levels of light would actually deplete your shadow essence. So that actually made it that you couldn't just constantly use skills or just spam the Shadow Leap whenever you wanted. You kinda had to be conservative with the way you used your skills. Fortunately, it wasn't so difficult that once the runes or the Shadow Essence depleted, you were done. Runes could only be recharged at shrines, and Shadow Essence could only be recharged by staying in shadows. I noticed that the game also offered a decent level of exploration. It's actually pretty open in the way that it allows you to navigate areas, and it wasn't very linear, so that was very nice. Overall, the game actually had a pretty punishing and challenging system, so that was something that really stood out for this. There were actually a few issues with the gameplay though, and one of the things to note was that the crosshair is limited to being over the left shoulder with no way to switch it on the fly. Now, apparently they fixed this in the PC version, but they added an option in the options menu, which is still kind of a little bit iffy. I would prefer something that allows you to do it on the fly. The console version unfortunately doesn't have it at all, so it made it very irritating because sometimes you were stuck at a certain camera angle because of that. In general, I did find that there were some issues with the controls and interaction. A good example was that I was on top of this, like, I don't know, archway thing, and I was planning to Shadow Leap to an area. I was holding R1 to Shadow Leap, and then I decided to cancel it by pressing square. Now the thing is, square is also the button which you use to kill or attack. And unfortunately, it initiated an aerial kill in front of a whole group of enemies. So you can imagine that I wasn't too thrilled with the fact that I got thrown into a situation where I was pretty much killed instantly. The checkpoint system is often a bit too brutal. It resets the level and you can actually lose a fair bit of progress when you die. This actually leads to a lot of unnecessary frustration, especially if you die for odd reasons. And there's nothing worse than making your way to the end and then all of a sudden getting killed or making some sort of mistake and having the whole level reset on you. I think the developers could have improved on this by allowing you to either save on the fly or add more checkpoints, or even a difficulty system which limits the saves at higher difficulties. That might have been nice too. I know some games have done that in the past, but the checkpoint system needs an overhaul. It is frustratingly brutal at times. On top of this, the game actually gets a bit repetitive. It's sort of a situation where you kill some guards, disable a light barrier, move on to the next area, rinse, repeat. The areas are actually pretty diverse, but at its core, it's pretty much the same drill every time. Enemies aren't actually that diverse as well either. I've noticed that you really only encounter 2 main enemies, and that's the swordsman and the archers. There wasn't really anything other than that. Apparently there is like a a captain or a boss that you do encounter, but I haven't reached that point yet. I did notice that there was like one really diverse area which I experienced, and you had to sort of shadow leap up a weird spiral cog thing, and there was these light beams that you had to dodge, so that was actually really nice. I would say one big thing to note that the game is missing though is a cover-based system. So I know this is something that's commonly found in modern day stealth games, but there's a reason for that, and that's that it actually gives you a good indicator of when you're actually hidden and when you're not, if you're hiding behind something, to reduce line of sight for an enemy. So I think they avoided that because they wanted to stay away from modern day stealth games and the features that they had, but that was kind of something that I felt played a small part in reducing the overall experience of the game. The visuals and art style pretty much speak for themselves. I mean, the game looks absolutely amazing. The areas are diverse and pretty to look at. They did really well to adhere to the Japanese ninja theme they had going on. One thing that I really liked, actually I absolutely loved, with the smoke, or the mist-like smoke that you could create when using certain skills. That was really good. There's some good visual changes to Aragami as well while you're in shadows, because he changes color. So basically, if you're hiding in the shadows, you go all dark and black. If you're out in the light, he has some color, so his cape will turn red. Another thing was that you've got runes on the back of your cape, and his shadow essence is indicated by these lines on your cape as well, so that was really good. It actually helped reduce a bit of clutter for the UI. Annoyingly though, the game seems to have a pretty low frame rate, and I don't mean low as in 30 FPS, I mean it seems like the frame rate was a little bit lower than that. It felt like it was around about the 15-20 frame per second mark. And to make matters worse, there are a lot of frame rate drops that cause a lot of hiccups, especially when the game was saving. Now, oddly enough, it doesn't seem like there's any point to a saving feature. Like, there's no point for the game to constantly save all the time, because there's a checkpoint that you get reset to the back of the... Like, you get reset at the start of the area anyway, so that was a little bit redundant, and it sort of made those frame rate drops ruin the immersion a little bit. Transitions between gameplay and cutscenes are absolutely terrible, and they constantly make you think that the game freezes. Like, you'd be playing, and then all of a sudden the game would freeze, and it would go to a cutscene. I think that needs to be improved on, because it's kind of a little irritating. Fortunately, it doesn't really affect the immersion, it just makes you think that the game's frozen every time. The camera angles at certain times, oh my god, they were horrid. Like, there'd be situations where I'd be in this, like, gazebo thing, and then I'd be trying to look down at an enemy, and all of a sudden, I'd have this umbrella thing just take up my entire screen, and I couldn't see crap. That really annoyed me. It actually affected the ability to play properly as well. This is probably being a little bit nitpicky. For me, I found that the crosshair can actually be a little bit too hard to see at times. It's a little bit small. I found that there are certain areas where there are shadows, but sometimes where it's still a little bit well lit for what a shadow is meant to be. I don't know, I just found it a bit odd. Like, sometimes I found myself having to jiggle the analog stick to figure out where the crosshair was at times. So it hasn't really hindered the gameplay all that much, but I think they need to figure out a better way to make that crosshair stand out. Audio for this was really good. I absolutely loved the music, especially the theme music at the start. It was absolutely beautiful. It sounded very cultural and added some authenticity to the region that this game took place in. So overall, the music had a very Japanese sound to it. It suited the game really well. It added some great ambience as well as suspense, but it was pretty calming as well. During alert states, it would actually it would transition into something more intense. Like, it wasn't just one of those situations where it went into an alert and all of a sudden the music just jumped right into this intense sort of stuff. It actually transitioned into it well, and when the alert state was over, it transitioned back into its calm state, so that was really nice. They also applied some sort of filter to make it sound like Aragami and Yamiko were spirits. Obviously, Yamiko is some sort of projection, that you'll notice throughout the game, Aragami being a spirit. It sounds a little odd at first, but you kind of realize that it works well. It's hard for me to explain. I'm sort of a little bit on the fence about it. I liked it in one way, but I found it odd in another. It's hard to explain. You kind of got to hear it for yourself to figure out what I'm talking about. But I think it worked because they're spirits, projections. They had to emphasize this in some way, so to have their voices as just like normal voices like mine is now, it would just be really odd. So I think they did well in that area. Sound effects were okay. There's some decent ambience if you don't have the music on. And using skills also sounds pretty cool, so there's a lot of good audio feedback. That was something they did really well. There's very little voice acting, but there's some words exchanged between Aragami and Yamiko, so it's not completely dead silence when they're talking, so that was actually really good. I would have liked if they actually had some Japanese voice acting though. Now this is coming from someone who absolutely hates reading subtitles, but considering the fact that there was dialogue delivered in a way that allowed you to read prompts on the screen, I wouldn't have mind had they gone for a more authentic voice acting. Obviously, there were budgets that they had to adhere to, so they didn't have that. Not a big issue. I don't think it actually affected the story that much. Another good little touch was that enemies will actually chat amongst themselves. Despite it being scripted, though, it really only happens at the start of certain areas. It actually adds a little bit life to these NPCs that you're horribly murdering. Okay, now I'm kind of apologizing in advance for this because I'm about to discuss some of the boring stuff, and that's the menu and user interface. The options I found were actually pretty diverse. I've noticed one thing that really stood out for me, especially being the console version, was that there was a field of view and VSync option, and this is so abnormal for a console. I'm not sure why they put it in, but at the same time I kind of do, because the problem here is that having the field of view too high and having VSync on actually seems to hinder the performance. But here's the problem. You need VSync on because without it on, there is a hell of a lot of screen tearing. I actually did find setting the field of view to around 60 to 70 was nice. It wasn't too far from the character, but it wasn't too close either. It also had good general audio and control options, but it actually did lack the ability to remap controls, so hopefully they do add that a little bit later on. Although the controls were kinda good for the type of game that it was. Something to note as well, that there's no way to unmark enemies. I forgot to mention, but you do get the ability to mark enemies in the game. And this actually causes a little bit of clutter because they kinda stay until you finish an area. I would have liked if the same button to mark enemies, you could just hold it down. It's up on the D-pad, by the way. You press up on the D-pad to mark the enemies. It would have been nice if you could hold up on the D-pad and then it would wipe the little markers that you put on. Maybe hold it for like 3 to 5 seconds or something like that. That would have been a nice way to eliminate the clutter on the screen. Overall, I think the game is pretty decent so far. It does really well to combine old school stealth mechanics with some modern day stealth mechanics. It eliminates some of the modern day stealth game tropes that would otherwise make the game a bit too easy. Now, don't get me wrong, I like the logic behind modern day stealth games, but I also like the added challenge that Aragami provides because it encourages stealthing a lot. At its core, it does stealth really well, and it also does it in its own extremely unique way. Like, I haven't actually seen anything like Aragami before. I mean, Mark of the Ninja would probably have some similarity, but it's definitely unique enough to stand out from other stealth games. Unfortunately though, the game actually still feels a little bit tarnished by some of its issues, but if you're a fan of stealth games, especially of old school stealth games, you can probably overlook most of these issues. Just expect a bit of frustration along the way though. So that's pretty much all I wanted to discuss for this video. So I'd like to thank Linceworks for making this game. Thank you for letting me showcase this on my channel. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for watching. I really appreciate it. Hopefully this gave you some insight onto the game. If there's anything that you think I missed, anything that you think could be improved on, any feedback, please do leave it in the comments below. But let's face it, I'm fucking perfect, right? Right? Yeah? No? Okay. Anyways, once again, thank you ladies and gentlemen, and as usual, I will see you in the next video.
possible.